Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Thursday, February 29th, last day of February. Can you believe it? 2 months already have gone by since the new year. Um, it just keeps moving along. Today, unlike yesterday, it's not so overcast and rainy here in New Hampshire. It's a nice, bright, sunny day, and I'm glad that we get to enjoy it together. Um, as always, I pray that you're getting up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. And I'm glad that we get to do it together. We are in a study called Rooted. And if you want more information about this study, you can go onto our website at bethanychurch.com. And there you could hit a couple of the tabs. You can listen to some of the sermons that we've already preached on this series, or pick up some other information as we are involved in a church-wide study. Everywhere I go, people are talking to me about Rooted now and the impact that it's making on their life, and it is good to see. Our hope is at the end of this that we would all feel just that much more equipped and inspired to go out and share our faith with others. This is what God is asking us to do. We're His plan. We're His plan A, and there is no plan B. So I'm glad that we're spending these mornings together. And I pray at the end of this series, you'd feel that much more confident in knowing something more about who God is, being drawn a little closer in community, and ultimately into fulfilling God's purposes for one's life. So this is week 4. And it is a topic of where is God in the midst of suffering. And we began the week talking about the reality of hardship and suffering, taking a look at David's life. And here, David, a man after God's own heart, was an exempt from some of the struggles. If you know anything about King David's life, you know that there are moments when he was held in such high esteem, and then moments when his own frailty, his own feet of clay were demonstrated. And yet, throughout it all, whether these were circumstances that he brought upon himself or they were caused externally, he would always give testimony that God was with him. And I thought that was a great illustration to demonstrate how there is this hardship and suffering all around us, and it doesn't necessarily mean that God is absent. It's just that we live in a world that is under judgment. The world is broken, and the consequences of one's choices and sins are being played out before us. And so when Jesus came back to heal that breach. When he comes back the second time, it's going to heal all of creation. And that's what we look forward to. But in the meantime, it shouldn't surprise us that there is so much suffering that is in this world. Secondly, and day 2, we talked about how we're not alone, that God uses this suffering and promises that He will be with us, that we will not be broken. Right? This is a great text that He has used to describe to us, some really interesting points. Like, for instance, in 2 Corinthians 4, verses 7-9, he says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." There are moments in our life when we can feel pretty hopeless, but in the midst of that, we find that the hope in knowing our hope is in knowing God, and that hope carries us through difficult times, and it comforts us and strengthens us and carries us through. Well, that gave way to day 3, and in day 3, we began to speak about this double-fisted faith, right? And we looked at a passage in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 through 40. And here it was all about, this hall of faith, giving giving homage to those who, it says, through faith, conquered kingdoms and administered justice, who gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, escaped the edge of the sword, right? All of these great, expressions of victory and overcoming. But then you get to about the middle of verse 35, and you find, while all that's going on, others are being tortured and refuse to be released because they're not going to turn their backs on God. Some faced jeers and flogging. Still others chained in prison. Some sawed in two, put to death by the sword, right? You realize that, boy, this is such a different tenor than the first part of Hebrews 11. And then you realize, yeah, that's this life, right? We have to engage this life with this double-fisted faith. In other words, we're holding on to these promises of God because that's what's going to give us comfort in the midst of our suffering. That's what's going to make, that's what's going to preserve one's life. And so I engage this world in the reality of all of its suffering and hardships, but I do so with this double-fisted faith, because greater is he that is in me than he that's in the Lord, right? That's he that's in the world. So I've put on this full armor of God now, and we're walking through these battles together. There's one other text that I thought might be of interest to you, and this is found in Hebrews chapter 2. So if you look at this passage here, I'll put this up here too for you to take a look at. So we talked about Hebrews chapter 11, but I would also like for you to just think of this text here, because I think that you will find, if you ever go back and read this again, you will be so encouraged because of the way in which this truth is being played out. So this idea of double-fisted faith, you saw this in Hebrews chapter 11. What I'm going to give you now is not in your book, but I think this is well worth our consideration. In Hebrews chapter 2, verse 5, we have already been told how Jesus is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, that God has spoken to us through his Son in these last days, through whom he had made the whole universe. And after providing purification for sins, he has sat down at the right hand of the God Most High. Well, in chapter 2, the writer of Hebrews continues saying, it is not to angels that he subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking, but there is a place where someone has testified. And now this quote is from Psalm chapter 8, right? So Psalm 8, it says, what is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor and put everything under his feet. Well, the writer continues here, verse 8, he says, in putting everything under him, God left nothing that is not subject to him. So you see, as a result of Jesus's work on that cross, he has now vanquished the greatest enemy, right? Sin, death. They have been overcome in what Jesus accomplished on that cross, so that there is no ruler, authority, no dominion, no power, no title that Jesus now has not been made subject to Jesus. But here's the point. The middle of verse 8 turns and it says, yet at present, we do not see everything subject to him. I love this text because it's saying what all of us feels, that we talk about this work of Jesus, but the world is still pretty jacked up. That there is all this suffering, there is all this hardship. Like we talk about this great redemption, but outwardly, there's not great many signs. Although I would push back a little bit and say the signs are there if we have eyes to see. But it is true that in the totality of what the Bible is promising, a new heaven, a new earth, a peace where there is no more tears, no more crying, no more suffering, no more death. Yeah, we don't see that. But it says here, at present, we don't see everything subject to him. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. See, this text is describing to you and me the twofold coming of Jesus. There is the already aspect of what Jesus accomplished, and that is he's tasted death for everyone. Jesus now is my hope. He is the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in him, though they were dead, yet shall they live. Jesus is the one now who says, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. But this is also the Jesus says that he is coming back. And when he returns, it will be to create this new heaven, new earth, and to completely vanquish this tension that now appears in the world. That's the not yet part. In this interim between his first coming and his second, you and I are given the responsibility to not only grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus, but to make him known, to be light that shines in the midst of the darkness, to be the salt of the earth. And so what people get to see are lives that are being transformed. And many of you can give testimony to that. I know I can. I'm a different person because the Spirit of God lives in me. My whole life has taken on a completely different trajectory because I have accepted Christ into my heart and I have submitted myself to his will and to his ways. And consequently, it affected who I married. It affected the children, my children, and how they were raised. It has everything to do with my vocation, the calling that God placed on my life. Everything has changed because Jesus came into my life. But the full effect of that is not going to be seen until he comes again. So if you're ever in that space where you're like, all this talk about Jesus, how he makes all things new, there's this passage here in Hebrews 2, and many others too, by the way, but this one is pronounced, right? It says, yet at present, we do not see everything subject to him. We don't see it. But the war has already been won. Jesus vanquished our greatest enemy by resurrecting from the dead. And now his patience means the salvation of men. He is giving those an opportunity to respond to this gospel before he comes back. I heard it put this way. It says the first coming of Jesus was to open the door and to invite us in. The second time Jesus comes, he's going to close that door. You don't want to be on the outside looking in. You want to be seated at the table, ready to begin this banquet. So today is day 4, and this is all about surrender. It's the chapter is entitled, our personal surrender, right? And so I want us to begin in this text by just recalling a story that is found in Matthew 26 and 1 Peter 5. So how about if I just put this up on the screen for you, and this way you will have it and we can look at it together, right? So Matthew 26 and 1 Peter chapter 5. So we'll begin with the most familiar of these two accounts, You may not know it yet, but you're aware of this passage. So here it is, Matthew 26. So let's look at this first. If you go down to verse 37, this is all this whole meditation today is about surrender. I love what it says in your books on page 79. On page 79 of your Rooted book, it has this quote. It says, surrender is an important aspect of our relationship with God, right? With the Lord. It goes beyond recognizing that we belong to God. When we surrender, we let go and put the focus where it belongs, on Him. But it isn't giving up in the way we normally define it. The action is more like giving over. The best example of this is Jesus as he approaches his crucifixion. And so this text in Matthew chapter 26 speaks about that. It said it's Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And so let's turn to verse 37. It says, Jesus took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, along with him. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. I want you to notice the emotion that Jesus is displaying in this text. Jesus now, who has been this bastion of life, right, and faith, now it says he's sorrowful, troubled. He says to the group of three, says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Have you ever found yourself in such a state where you were just completely overwhelmed, so troubled, you didn't know where to turn, what to do? But notice Jesus here, with that sense of sorrow and trouble, being overwhelmed, instead of dwelling on that, what does he do? He forms a little prayer meeting, doesn't he? He says, stay here, keep watch with me. And then going a little further, what happens? Jesus falls to his face, with his face to the ground, and prays. See, this is exactly what we have been, challenged to do. It says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, with prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. See, these aren't just words that are on a page that sound spiritual. They have power. We are to pray because our Father listens. And notice here, it says Jesus fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be returned from me, be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. So Jesus knows what's coming. He's already, told his disciples way back in chapter 16 and 17 and around chapter 20. In very pointed language, Jesus told them that they're going to go to Jerusalem, and when they get there, the chief priests and the teachers of the law are going to arrest him. Then they're going to hand him over to the Romans, where he will be mocked and flogged and killed, crucified. But on the third day, he would rise from the dead. There is no doubt that Jesus understood what was lying for him in Jerusalem. And this is on the eve of his crucifixion, so the time has come. And Jesus is praying, if it's possible, let this cup be taken from me. And yet notice how he prays, but it's not my will, it's yours. So he returns to his disciples. He finds them sleeping. Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour? He says, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. What's the temptation here? The temptation is not to do God's will. The temptation is to do things your own way. What if Jesus at this moment and said, you know what, this is too much. I know we talked about this, Father, about me coming and giving my life a ransom for the sins of men. I know that, this will wipe away men's sin and open up a channel for them to come back home. I know all those things, but I just don't. I'm just not feeling it. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do it. You see, he's looking for another way. He says, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. But in his prayer, it's always about not as I will, but as you will. And that decision right there is the temptation to do my will over against God's will. And even though the spirit may be willing, this body is so weak. Jesus is just underscoring it again for you and me to see it in real life circumstances. And if that wasn't enough, in verse 42, he says he went away a second time and he prays, my Father, if it is not possible, right? First time, if it is possible. He's saying, but if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. So there is this resignation now that there is no other way. The way has been laid out. The way to the cross has already been defined. It has been prophesied in the Old Testament. By his stripes we will be healed. Upon him the iniquity of us all has been laid. Yeah. And so he comes back again. He finds them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. Peter is a part of this group, right? Is Peter not going to fall to this temptation? Remember, not too long ago, Peter in his spirit was like, Lord, when he was told that Jesus would be mocked and flogged and crucified, he said, no, Lord, this will never happen. And Jesus had to rebuke him and said, get behind me, Satan. He says, you have your mind on the things of men rather than the things of God. Why? Because, see, his spirit was willing. I'm not going to let this happen. But with all that bravado, when push comes to shove and everything was going down and he realized that he was exposed and found himself now in a compromised position because he has been associated with Jesus, and it doesn't look like Jesus is getting any special treatment here. He doesn't want any part of that. I don't know him. Denies him 3 times, just as Jesus said. But the graciousness of Jesus is that he restores Peter again, only this time when Peter recognizes Jesus, when he turns, he's a force to be contended with. And so it's just like Jesus says, we have to not to fall into this temptation. We have to learn to surrender ourselves. It's not about giving up. It's about giving over. I love that expression. Verse 44, so Jesus, for the third time, he left them, went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. And then he returned to the disciples and said, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Jesus is now prayed up. Jesus is now ready. The assumption here, right, is that his conversation with the Father brought about this sense of inner peace and conviction. And you don't see Jesus turning back. You don't see him trying to negotiate a better deal. One of my favorite texts in the Bible is when he's standing before Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate is trying to get Jesus to open up to him, to give him a reason why he should let him go. And Jesus remains silent. And Pontius Pilate looks at him and says, do you not understand that I have the authority to free you? And Jesus then looks at him and says, you have no authority over me except that authority that my Father has given you in heaven. Because, see, Jesus prayed, not my will, but your will. Right? Your will be done. And now, convicted by what God's will is, he demonstrates a faithfulness and moving forward. That's why, my friends, this is such a great text about surrender, because it's coming from the very Savior that we submit to. Jesus, Lord of all, also went through this period, and we see in him this complete trust, this complete resignation to the will of the Father. This is the way. And consequently, what happens? It's a horrible death, but in short order, Jesus resurrects from the dead, demonstrating that he has power and authority over over Satan, right? Over the devil who rules over this world for a period. Jesus now shows himself to be victor. Death couldn't handle him, and the grave couldn't hold him. And he has now opened up the door for everyone, because at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. It was a difficult road, but that road leads to eternal life. And what Jesus says, he says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. Because God's will can be trusted. So 1 Peter 5, you just go back and read that for yourselves. But what it tells you is, it says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Right? It's always a matter of God's timing, not yours. But God, it says, humble yourselves under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Where is God in the midst of the suffering? Waiting for you and ready to sustain you, to give us all that we need to fight this fight of faith. Because, my friends, as you've heard me say many times, this is never going to be heaven. So I pray that today's study just encourages you just a little bit more, that you are inspired by the actions of Jesus to serve him more faithfully, because he is good all the time. Seize the day, my friends. Lord willing, we'll spend another day tomorrow as we close this week of study. Until then, God bless.